The story of Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic mission is a long one, which begins well before 1916, and if it wasn't for this particular expedition, we may never have heard of Sir Ernest Shackleton. On the 10th of May 1916, Ernest Shackleton and 5 of his crew arrived at King Haakon Bay on the south coast of South Georgia. They had sailed for 17 days, 700 stormy nautical miles, with tainted water supply from Elephant Island across the Scotia Sea. They'd sailed in the 22-foot James Caird to get help, and on Elephant Island there remained 22 crew following the wreck of the Endurance in the ice of the Weddell Sea 6 months earlier. After a few days of rest at Cave Cove, eating albatross and minor reconnaissance walks, Shackleton and 2 of his men, Tom Crean and Frank Worsley, set off at 3 a.m. across the island to reach Husvik whaling station. This 36-mile trip across South Georgia from King Haakon Bay to Stromness is now known as the Shackleton Transverse and is recognised as one of many epic Antarctic journeys. The gentleman I'm about to speak to decided in 2005 that this would be among the items he wanted to experience, and he has kindly agreed to an interview to discuss the topic and his experience. His name is Mark Vikerage. What was it that got you into this idea?
It was just something that I wanted to do. I knew a little bit about the history. I'd also done 6 continents, so this was going to be my 7th. So it was a trip to South Georgia and the Antarctic Peninsula itself. So I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, really. I guess the realization was that I didn't realize it was quite such a significant challenge in the sense of like what it is now. So many people want to do it and it's just so much more expensive. At the time it was just, oh, I fancy going there, I'd love to do it. It looks a little bit of physical hardship and endurance, and I was probably more into that than I am now, but it's still something I do enjoy.
And you had heard of the story before you decided to do it. Had you heard of that story? Yeah. And what age were you when you encountered that story?
Probably early, I don't know, mid-20s maybe, something like that.
Would you have read a few of the stories to do with the Antarctic, or is it just that?
Scott and Amundsen always sort of struck a chord, and I'm always one for giving credit where credit's due, because a lot of people actually don't realise Shackleton's Irish. He's British. And same with the Norwegian. You know, Scott at the Antarctic's famous for actually coming second, so not really.
Yeah, I mean, but they're all such interesting stories. I think even looking at the story of Endurance, I know for myself, it's almost unbelievable sometimes when you read some of these stories, like what they did, what they encountered. Your video starts off with, in the summer of 1914. I don't know if we can get the music going, but in the summer of 1914, Sir Ernest Shackleton set off aboard the Endurance, bound for the South Atlantic. The goal of his expedition was to cross the Antarctic overland, but more than a year later, and still half a continent away from the intended base, the Endurance was trapped in ice and eventually was crushed. For 5 months, Shackleton and his crew survived on drifting ice packs in one of the most savage regions of the world, before they were finally able to set sails again in the ship's lifeboats. The story of how Shackleton reached South Georgia Island is one of the epics in the history of survival. And then there's this kind of little known story of the Traverse of South Georgia, which began on Friday, May 19th. I'm not sure if it was 1915 or 1916. It's that Traverse, you know, I want to kind of understand it, and I'd love feeling about it. One of the questions I wanted to ask you just at the start was, do you think if you were in Shackleton's boots and you looked at this crossing that you had to do and you didn't have a direct map, or the maps were wrong, what was that like to begin and set out on this? And then you must have been able to imagine yourself in that situation if you didn't have maps or if you didn't know the route. So
so there was 4 of us that did the crossing. All of us had done a CV to actually say that we were qualified, so they don't just take anybody, it is an undertaking. And obviously there was a guide as well that had supposedly done the route before. But he was actually trying to use a GPS at one point, which we thought was a real error. And I say we, there was myself and there was a Swiss mountain guide called Bruno who didn't speak much English. We were questioning a couple of times why we'd actually stop, because obviously stopping somewhere like that is quite dangerous, really. You just get cold very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And the GPS with the number of satellites, particularly in 2005, probably wasn't that great, floating overhead. So we decided, we made a gesture to say, well, it must be that way, because it seemed pretty obvious at the time what the route was. And it wasn't that we were doing anything to sort of avoid crevasses. We were taking a direct line route. Obviously, we were harnessed up, but yeah, it was. I think there was a little bit of apprehension at the start, and I don't know if you're going to ask me this, but later on there was one or two incidents on the way that we went through, which are actually highlighted in the video. But yes, it quickly got to a point where we thought this isn't going to be easy. Yeah.
And just reading Shackleton's account today, what you say about it looked like there was only one way, and you can kind of get this in some of the bits that are written in the story. Is there's just towering stuff on either side of you. There's only one real way through this. But listen, instead of skipping ahead, what was the first day like, or can you explain to me what landing on King Haakon Bay was like, and how did that start? The gear you had. These are the things I think.
The gear I packed up was heavy. And I often tell people this, and it's not a sexist comment at all, but because I was sharing the cheapest accommodation on the ship, I was right next to the galley. So nothing lavish about where I was staying at all. But my bag was outside, and there wasn't a single woman could lift it off the ground. In fact, some of the men couldn't either. So that's not carry it. They couldn't even lift it. Yeah, and it was. So being the youngest there, out of the four of us traveling, I got lumbered with a spare rope, a tent, and the shovel as well. And I also got given 4 kilograms of spaghetti bolognese, which was our food.
Wow.
So the backpack itself, and obviously once you go, you're self-sufficient. There is no helicopter rescue or anything along those lines. It's just you're on your own. So hence the CV and application. You've got to demonstrate that you've got some mountaineering technical experience to go.
Okay. And what was it like when you started off? Obviously, all your gear comes off was it a boat or a rib boat or something like that?
No, it was a Zodiac. It was a dinghies. Yeah, so we got taken off. I can't really remember much about it. I would guess that some of the passengers gave us a round of applause or something like that. I think I honestly can't remember that bit. I just remember landing on the beach and just thinking, "Oh, we're on our way now," and sorting the pack out, making sure it was comfortable, and getting stuff handy that was going to be getting stuff close, basically. So gloves when I needed them.
What was that terrain like? Were you dropped off at the very end of the bay?
It was a gravelly beach. I do remember that. The sea was coming in. It wasn't particularly rough or anything like that. It was pretty much like every other Zodiac landing we'd done. It wasn't too bad coming off. You was just getting the gear. But yes, it was. Well, once we started, it went uphill pretty quickly. Remember the terrain to the left-hand side, which would be the northish, I believe, would have been quite mountainous. There was lots and lots of grey. Well, in fact, black and white. And in fact, that's another one of my lasting memories, was just that it was either snow or rock. There was nothing else there.
Wow.
And to be honest, it could have been quite intimidating. I had seen some documentaries before I'd actually travelled, and even my parents had seen one. I remember my mum saying, "That looks pretty grim. You're not going there, are you?" But and it literally was. It almost could have been filmed in black and white, because there's no colour in the terrain at all. It's just bleak. Is the way to put it. And of course, it doesn't help with a bit of grey mist coming across, which was one of the problems. Actually, was a little bit of visibility.
And
Um,
that's in the account of Shackleton, is that they saw fog chasing them. You know, I think it was at sunset, was chasing them all the time. Even the first night, this fog. They ended up putting a guy behind on a 50-foot rope to steer them, because they couldn't see. There was a moonlight, but it was just highlighting the fog as they walked. So they trailed the rope back, and the guy at the back was able to tell if they were going left or right during that fog. But I think it was twice at least that they encountered this fog. It was quite bleak and horrible and scary, I believe,
yeah,
as well.
well, we definitely hit it pretty much early on, which I think is one of the reasons why we stopped. But the thing is, we did have compasses. We can walk on a bearing.
Mm.
And that's really what probably Shackleton couldn't have done at the time, I presume. But I get the principle of what he was doing. You could feel the sort of tension in the rope going right or left or something. That's
Yeah. Or
possibly
that
how
I
it
think
would work.
I don't know if they staggered themselves with the front person as far forward as possible, and they were at the back, but they were able to see if they were keeping a line or not. Interesting. And also, I don't know if you've ever read the story of them tobogganing down one of the last
Yes.
slopes. And just reading the Shackleton one today, he talks about unroping and sliding kind of childlike down one of the last slopes, which sounds to me like they put their heel behind them and one leg out in front and slid um, off the
It,
ropes. Yeah,
it's. I think it's been a while since I've read it, to be honest, because having done it, it's like almost like a tick box, and I've moved on to something else.
yeah,
But I think the way my interpretation of it was that they'd been going on for so long that they weren't really making any progress, and they could just do this all day and all night. They eventually just decided to just go for it
mm,
and slide down the other side,
yeah,
and they ended up being lucky that they didn't crash into any rocks.
yeah.
Um, and and to be honest, coming down that terrain, that's I understand why they would have got away with that, because there weren't that many rocks until you hit. I mean, it was still pretty steep,
Mm.
and
But just
we certainly didn't slide down it.
stepping back, we got kind of sidetracked with the fog element, and that reminded me when I was just reading this today. Um, So you were saying that the start of it was an uphill from the beginning. You were pretty much going up
Yeah,
from the
it wasn't
beginning.
steep. From the beach, it wasn't too bad. It was just general snow. But then there was a couple of bits that we had to zigzag round to go gain a little bit of altitude. Um, but again, South Georgia is not a massively high place by any stretch in the
Okay.
grand scheme of things. But yeah, we zigzagged just to get a little bit, because otherwise it's just such hard work.
Hmm.
And the snow began to get softer, so obviously just at the ascent, everything was certainly above the knee. It was thigh deep.
Wow.
Um, once we got going and a little bit onto the high ground.
And so how far do you think you went on the first day, or the you were saying it was divided up over 3 days, was it? Was it 2 nights, 3 days?
No, it was actually 2 days, because we did quite well, but I think that was more to do with the time of year that we actually did it.
Yeah.
Um,
Were you saying that was
yes,
in November and it was colder or something like that,
yeah,
was it? Yeah.
early season. By February, I think a lot of it probably would have been um, dried up, and it would have been literally climbing over crevasses.
Yeah.
So sort of wavy, getting
Mm.
in and out of them. I mean, it was hard enough doing what we were doing, but I think that probably would have been an extra element to it.
Um, you said you'd done preparation and stuff like that. What was that CV like? Or what is that? Is it just all your experience that you had up until that point? Is that
Yeah,
the CV you're talking about? Yeah.
yeah, you had to give a list of things that you've done and experienced. So
Okay.
I think the biggest one that probably what run it for me, apart from some obviously some UK stuff, some um, stuff in the Alps, was the big peak in Argentina, which was pretty horrendous. We didn't summit because the weather was just so bad, but it was 48 hours and minus 45, minus 50 maybe. It
Wow.
was, yeah. So that was at the high camp. So 7,000 meters nearly. Sorry, in fact, that's the peak. Is nearly 7,000. We stayed about 6,200 meters, which is still higher than Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
So, and we stayed in a tent for 48 hours, looking for a break in the weather, and didn't get it. And that was an expedition in itself. I mean, knuckles went white, toenails all fell off within a few weeks
Wow.
of arriving home. So
So you got like mild frostbite while you were there.
I,
It's
I think it was just my body's reacting to it. Whether it was frostbite or not, I don't know. But certainly, yeah, it was damn cold. I've never complained about British weather since. Never.
and Shackleton actually said that as well. He said, I when we were climbing up one of these, I think they went up to 4,500 feet. I'm not sure if it's Trident or what they
It
were
wouldn't. Don't think
what they
it's
were
that high.
going up. But he said that he remembered they were getting very hot with the sun. It was like baking them. And he remembered a point in time where he said he would never complain about the sun again, that, it can mean the difference between life and death. And he said he'd never he remembered that, he recalled it when he was climbing up towards there, or I'm not sure if it was
Maybe
the Trident. What,
no. I don't think the Trident's that high. It's not. It's quite steep, but it's quite icy. So it's not risky, but it's not a technical thing if you know what you're doing. Um,
Mm.
you know,
It's difficult to tell what they climbed. I mean, I was trying to read it and break it down today, and it's quite a long series of back and forths that they did when they climbed across this.
the map
Um,
on the video actually shows that they did several like summits, then came back, then tried again, and tried again. Eventually, they were at that point, which presumably later got identified as the Trident. That's when they decided they'd had enough and they just went down. I also
yeah.
think that's the point where the Shackletons, the guys stopped on the way up and they had the little rest.
Okay. Is there?
I'm not,
Yeah.
when he said they'd been asleep for several hours, when it was actually only about 10 minutes or something.
Yeah. Yeah. What's what was your distance that you did, say on the first day? What was that like? Or do you
If I'm honest, I
remember
can't
where
remember.
did you get to?
The distance element never really came into it because I knew we were aiming for just past the Trident. So what it was in distance, I just knew it was about
So your
um,
first day you were aiming for
eight
just
and
past the Trident. Sorry to cut across you. Yeah, okay.
yeah, it was going to be. To be honest, I can't remember, but it would have been X hours walking or something like
Mm,
that. And the idea was if we could get above the Trident, great. If we couldn't, we would stay at the bottom of it. But we were quite successful. It was starting to get dark when we arrived, and
mm,
certainly I remember it getting quite dark when we were coming down the Trident, the other side.
right. Yeah. Fascinating. And then you camped. I see it, we've got some of the photographs from your video that I hope you don't mind me kind of accompanying this. So that they kind of zoom in and zoom out, but I'm sure I can freeze frame them as well. There's some of those photographs of your camp. And was it one tent? You were saying there was two tents, is that right? Was there two tents and then it became one? Is that
There was two tents and it became one.
right?
Put it this
Okay.
way, mine was intact.
Okay, right. Wow. And what they just got damaged or what happened? Or they got lost?
um, let's just say there were some missing pools in another tent.
Wow. Wow. Oh, from the beginning? Are we saying that?
Uh, no.
No, okay. Interesting. Interesting. There's a story in there, I'm sure, somewhere. Yeah. You were saying something happened on the Trident. It was to do with you were can you explain that to me? What happened? You were saying it was the first time you ever used an ice axe in anger. Um,
There was
what did that look like, first of all, when that happened?
the
What was the
Trident.
terrain?
Right at the top, it was absolutely sheet ice, just ice. So the crampons had been on for a little while anyway. That's the metal spikes. If people don't know what that is,
Mhm.
and basically got to stamp in to make sure that you don't slip. However, while I was waiting in the queue, the Australian lady whose name I can't remember, to
Kim,
be honest.
Kim or
No, Kim.
no,
Kim was
the
her
man.
husband. Kim was the man. Yeah,
Okay.
I can't remember her name for the life of me. But she started walking across the top where we were sort of belaying each other, and hadn't shouted, and I ended up getting moved off my feet, pulled off my feet.
Wow.
So it was the first time and only time I've ever had to use it in anger. So it was self-arrest, and managed to stop. They could see what was happening because I shouted, and it ended up being quite okay. But it could have been a hell of a lot worse if I didn't have my ice axe handy. So
Mm. And
um,
just going back to what you were saying about belaying, so you communicate during belaying, isn't that right? That you say started the
yeah,
climb,
yeah.
finished climbing, stuff like this.
Yeah,
Um,
it wasn't like that. It was more or less you can go across now. It's safe, and then the tension was in, and whatever else. It wasn't like a vertical thing. It was right.
yeah.
I was going up at an angle. She was going across, but across the sheet ice. But as she
Wow.
went, she didn't tell me she'd gone. So hence I went, and then I could have pulled everybody down, but managed to secure it
Okay.
pretty
Wow.
quickly.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah,
And
but it was horrendously slippy though. I
you're
mean,
saying it really stood out in your memory that moment were you there?
yeah. I mean, I've done quite a lot of Scottish wintering courses and stuff like that. It's the first thing to do is learn to self-arrest, but I've never actually done it in anger, and that still remains the only time I've ever done it in anger.
Yeah.
But it was straight down on the axe, um, and in fact, I remember watching a documentary a few years afterwards where some Royal Marines had attempted it and they'd not got up. That doesn't mean we're better than them or anything like that. It just means we got a bit lucky, perhaps with the weather, because normally a lot of these things are weather. Uh, it certainly has a big say on things, the weather. Um, yeah, so they had problems getting up it, and I think they were right at the bottom. So it just goes to show we managed to succeed. They didn't, but
Yeah.
the elements definitely probably featured in their expedition.
In the Shackleton expedition, they talk about using carpenter's adze to cut out steps in the ice. I presume this is something similar that they were trying to go up to a height to see what was on the other side. Is it like that on the Trident that but
Um,
it was sheer ice for you when you were there. It's
it started to taper. It was almost at the summit, so it came up. If I could just do it, so you can see it came
yeah,
like that, then across, and then there was a little bit more, which was more snowy for some reason. Maybe some some snow had fallen onto it, and then it was the sort of downhill. But there was two elements to it. I remember going up, then across, and then just a little trudge, more or less. And
yeah.
that's where we all met and congregated before we decided how we were going to go down.
Okay. Fascinating, fascinating. And then from there, so you camped at the bottom of the Trident,
We
and
did, yeah.
I just, when you were saying that, I was just imagining um, the screws that they put into the bottoms of their shoes. And reading earlier, I don't mean to reference this all the time, but I thought it was a good thing to do was to read the story today and say to myself, or I have it fresh in my memory. Um, but Shackleton writes that he'd given up his good, I forget the name of the shoes he used, but he had these mediocre shoes for the journey, but he'd given them up to some member of the crew at some stage, his proper shoes that he should have used. Um, can you imagine doing that with just screws? Would you trust
No,
just
I,
screws?
I can't
Yeah,
imagine doing with any kit of that era at all, to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
It's all lightweight. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they put nails through their boots so they could use them
yeah,
as crampons.
yeah.
Um, I mean, they were tough in those days, weren't they? That generation.
Well, I mean, like it's just fascinating, and it's this. I think I said this to you. It's this real life information about what that terrain is like that a lot of us are missing. And what you were talking about. The next part of that journey was down into the Crean Glacier, or even before that. That it was. did you say it was never ending white from that point on, or um
Yeah, there's I think if I remember rightly, there's two glaciers. One leads on to the other. The Crean Glacier, from after we first spoke, I looked it up, and it's actually not that long, but maybe that's so I don't know. But anyway, it's just a plateau
mm.
with peaks either side, bits of black with white tops
Oh
either
yeah,
side,
just going back to
and
what you said about coming down off the Trident and camping. So
mhm.
that night, was it a relief to feed everyone the spaghetti, or you know, you had 4 kilos of this? What do you remember that first night, or is it a were you tired?
No, I remember it. Our guide was Nepalese, so that's some of the prairie flags that are featured in the
Ah, I
video.
see them, the three flags. Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually more. That was just a close up of the middle three. Um, I remember doing dinner. There was everybody helped out. We were all doing various bits and pieces. Um, I remember putting my down jacket on and thinking I'm warm enough, so um, I'm glad of that. And my one lasting memory was the Australian New Zealand couple, him and his wife, whittering on as I dozed off, complaining about one of them not brushing their teeth. And I thought how ridiculous we're in this magical place in the middle of nowhere, and how obscure, how and they could they just chose to bicker to each other. So that
Yeah.
was a little bit of their relationship.
And
But
was it
I was out for
magical? Was it magical standing there?
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the first day. I enjoyed coming down the Trident, especially because there's a style of walk and sort of where you almost goose step down, and ended up along with Bruno, who's probably done this more than anybody with him being a mountain guide in Switzerland. We got down pretty quickly, to be honest,
And is this
and felt really safe.
goose stepping? Well, explain that to me. Is it like big
It's just a
long strides
big
where
long
you
step
drop?
down, yeah. Then your foot goes down, and then you'll slide a little bit, and then
Yeah,
another one, and you'll slide a little bit more, maybe.
yeah,
Well, you'll go down a little bit in the snow. You're not slipping. So
yeah. It kind of
that's not.
piles up under your heel, and then
Yeah,
you skip to the next step, and that piles up.
yeah,
It's almost going down a sand dune, is something
yeah.
similar. Yeah.
But whilst it
Okay.
was getting dark, we couldn't really. There was no rocks. I remember being a couple of big rocks actually. In fact, I think they were near where we camped. Um, so there's certain bits I remember vividly, and certain bits I probably just assume from having been there. But yeah, getting down was I was pretty pleased that we got down. We got the tent up after finding. Yeah, we just thought, yeah, that's it. We'll just have to keep cozy tonight. Um, adapt, improvise, overcome. So
Mm.
no, just to get on with it really. Nobody was coming to help us, so we knew that much. But yes, it was really strange hearing them too saying, "Yeah, brush your teeth," and I just dozed off at that point.
Yeah.
And the next morning, made breakfast, and I can't remember what breakfast was now, but I presume it was some sort of porridgey oaty thing or something like that. But I don't remember feeling hungry, and I don't remember feeling thirsty.
Hmm. And were you taking water from the land? Was that how you were, or did you have water with you,
Um,
or a mixture of
I
both?
definitely took water. Um, the problem is obviously it freezes, so we must have stopped off on the first day to get something and use mess tins. I can't remember that, but I think yeah. In fact, I think we did. They've got I forget the name of the brand, but there's a special brand that's always used by mountaineers, and we made a brew with mess tins.
Right.
But I don't think we did that on the second day at all. I think we'd had enough, and second day was
We may have to stop the call and start again in a second. It gave me a warning saying there's 10 minutes. I think on the free version, there's like
yeah, that's
30,
fine.
40 minutes, and then we start again. Oh yeah, so it says 7 minutes, 58 seconds at the top. So 6 minutes is fine. Um, So yeah, so when you say you d don't think you needed to have anything the second day, were you just ready to, you were just committed, you were into it, all the edginess was gone?
Oh no, I don't think we stopped for a hot drink. Is what I'm saying. I don't think we.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we did actually on day one, but not on day two. Uh, it was a slightly warmer day, so that the water bottles probably didn't freeze. Is probably more the point, because I've
Okay.
had that before. Hold a bottle of orange and upside down. Um, and I also think I probably took my large flask as well. Probably would have come in handy, which probably explains the size of the backpack as well. But not that much too into it. It was just a big flask.
I could maybe
I've
go
still got it.
through. Do
I've
you?
still
Yeah.
got it.
Have you got it
I,
there?
I,
No.
I,
I see you
yeah.
nodding towards the corner. I'm like, he's got it there. Yeah,
No,
very.
no, it's not here, but I do have it, and I actually went to Argentina with that, so that must be now 24 years old or something like that.
Wow. Wow. It's a thermos of some sort, I presume, is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's just a big solid flask, yeah, and
yeah.
it's been around, but yeah, I think that's something that I do like to do. Is if you look after your kit, it tends to look after you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like with your tent that day. It's a sign, that, that you had your tent poles and whatever. So it looks like a big enough tent as well.
What?
Like, was it like 4 or 5 kilos in itself, or was it?
Um, I'm
It
gonna have
was
to remind myself
was
because
that
I
a
actually
yellow tent?
bought. Yeah, I can't remember what brand it was. I can't remember if it was a.
I was trying to
Um,
see if I could see the name on it. Um,
so
if it's
I
a
got a
dome.
very similar tent of my own that I bought after the Argentina trip because they were the only ones left standing after the storm we encountered.
Wow.
And I've still got that as well, and I still use that. Um,
Mm.
but the tent was fine. They're pretty solid, pretty rigid, and whilst it was a bit cramped, it was it was manageable. It just meant we had to put the bags in the dome, which wasn't necessarily a problem because it was quite. It turned
Okay.
out to be quite mild that night and day, the next day. Uh, but if it had been windy, we would have had a bit of a problem.
Mm. I
Something we
just
would have had to overcome.
I'm just looking at one of the photographs here where it looks like you've come up beside a rock. The stone looks quite interesting. It's kind of a red and grey stone, but you've dug a hole with the shovel and or the spade,
The
and it
shovel
looks
was
like,
in my backpack, a big blue one.
yeah, big blue was it looks plastic, but it's not plastic. It's
No,
metal and
no,
plastic. Matte. And then you can see this kind of Primus stove you've got going with a foil liner in a hole. And it does look suspiciously like spaghetti bolognese or small sausages in the
it was
pot.
spag ball.
Spag
It was
ball.
definitely spag ball. I actually don't remember eating it. I just remember the cook telling me you've got 4 kilos of spag ball.
I see a little ice wall that you've built, and it's interesting because in the story that I read today, they said that when they did make their hoosh or their food, they dug it down 3 feet. They dug the hole that they were going to put their stove 3 feet into the snow because a wind could have come at any stage and put out their fire or whatever they were using. I think they were just using petroleum as the fuel. But
Yeah,
it's interesting. You've kind of got the exact same setup. I can just make out even some snow bricks just to the right of the cooking area. That
we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean it's pretty standard to do that sort of thing. It's also you overlap on your tent as well.
Okay.
Um, you put the snow up so it doesn't leave any exposure. Nothing gets underneath it because that's the worst bit. It'll just rip your tent up. It'll
Mm.
take off.
And I see that photograph here at if I can get YouTube to stop in the right place. Yeah, the tent. The bags look
Yeah,
huge. Your bags look just is
yeah.
is it the space for all your gear? Is that what it is? Like the down jackets, stuff like that. It's
Yeah. So sleeping bag, I always put at the bottom, always in the bottom pouch, and there's a divider, and you can just pull it out from the bottom if you want to. Then everything else in, and obviously the handy stuff, metals, anything heavy tends to go close to the back and central to avoid you leaning to one side.
okay.
Hence, in Mike, anything essential, the essentials for me is always boots and sleeping bag. You can't compromise on any of them. Obviously, never wear cotton. I might do now, but it's never anything where you're going to get wet or cold. Don't wear cotton.
What would be your go-to clothing if you were doing something? Would it be neoprene or would it be some sort of technical clothing or?
Oh, anything by Jotner is what I use now.
Right.
Which it's
How do you spell
spelled
that?
with a J, Jotner.
Jatnar.
Nar. It's Jotner, pronounced Jotner.
There was a mountain you were talking about opposite Mont Blanc called Dent de Jante. I think it was I was looking this up today. I've obviously got the spelling wrong. I couldn't find this. I was like 20 nearest mountains near Mont Blanc or technical
D-E-N-T.
climbing. D-E-N-T, yeah.
Space, do, as in D-U. And then Jante is giant with an E instead of an I. Dent de Jante.
E-A-N-T. Dent de Jante. Is that on your bucket list? Is that like one that's on your bucket list, or you've done this one?
I've done it.
Wow.
I think I did that afterwards. I had done some stuff in the Alps before. I can't remember why we got talking about that one last time, but I think what I'd said is like that was probably the most scariest climb I've ever done.
Wow.
Probably not the most technical because there's some handholds and it's but yeah, for sheer exposure, it is just very intimidating. It is literally a sheer drop of about literally 1 mile. I think it's about 1,600 meters straight down.
All right, let's stop here. I'm going to stop the session and start another one if that's okay with you. Have you got time to do?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right, cool. I'll send it to you by email. Just looking at Dent de Jante while we were having that bit of a break and a video of it, and then the height, 4,013 meters, and a few questions. We're kind of diverging at a halfway point within the story of the South Georgia. We've gone off on a bit of a tangent, and I like this tangent. But you know, Dent de Jante, some of these things, it made me kind of go down a bit of a rabbit hole where I was thinking about Don Willems, Peter Boardman, Joe Tasker, the pinnacles. And when I see this, the sharp pinnacle of the Dent de Jante, you know, I have a few questions, and I've got a big question at the end of this tangent for you. But where do you kind of get the idea that you're going to go do Dent de Jante? Where does that like?
I looked at a week in the Alps, and it's, to be honest, when I go climbing, you always rely on local knowledge, even if it's just for the weather sometimes. But the guides know the routes, the ins and outs, the little nooks and crannies, and just about everything that goes on. So I got teamed up. I went with a company and I got paired up with a guy to do some classic mountaineering training. And then they decide the routes when you get there. And it's virtually always weather dependent. I mean, I've done several trips to the Alps. And the one that's always escaped me so far is the Matterhorn. That got snowed off, ended up doing some stuff in France and Italy and elsewhere in Switzerland.
The Matterhorn always to me sounds like one that you'd go like this, going, "Thank God it was snowed off." I mean, it's got a reputation, doesn't it? It really does.
It does, yeah. It's the one that's got away so far. It was the one that really bridges between being a mountain walker and a mountain climber. Although I've done probably other things, but it's definitely the one that everybody, if you only have to look at the Matterhorn to know it's a bit of an undertaking. But obviously, Dent de Jante is much less known, so much so you couldn't even find it.
Yeah,
it actually translates. It translates to giant's tooth.
I definitely had it spelt wrong. Oh, giant's tooth. Okay, and that's the Jante. I had it spelt D-O-N. D-E.
Dent. It's Dent, the giant.
Dent,
yeah, that's giant's tooth.
Well,
but when you see it, you'll see why it resembles giant's tooth.
Yeah. I'm just looking at it here. So there's a bit of a climb up on pretty much glass or ice, and or a bit of a walk up, and then there's a climb. How long does that climb of rock take to?
It's actually surprisingly quick. We were the first team out that morning. We were the first team there. And there's a bit of a story behind it if you want me to go over
Yeah,
it.
please do.
Okay, so we set off, and I had real difficulty. Well, first of all, you've got to scramble a little bit and get to a place. At that point, that's where you ditch your bags, and it's a bit of mountain etiquette. You ditch your bags, and nobody touches them. It's all pretty safe. I ditched my bag, hadn't realised I'd left my camera, so I was pretty gutted, having got to the top and finding I had no camera. But what actually happened was, as I went round, I struggled to have enough flexibility. There's almost like a right angle like this, where you effectively come up with a bit of rock that you're on, and then to the side, and that's the one with the sheer drop. So you're almost coming up onto the face. And I just remember thinking, my God, I'm never going to be able to get around here. But bit of, I can't remember, probably a bit of heave-ho and less technical stuff. Just managed to get myself in position, and then I was on the face itself with this other guy that had been paired with all week, and then the guide was sort of leading up. So he had us on two ropes coming down, and then you go up, and the exposure is enormous. There's no doubt about it. You look down, and just as we were approaching the top, and there was about 4 or 5 teams out, all following us behind. The mountain rescue helicopter came up, and we were thinking, "Oh God, somebody's fallen. What's happened here?"
Mm-hmm.
And we were sort of having a look over our shoulders and seeing what was going on. And all of a sudden, the doors on this helicopter open with a camera on it, a full phone camera.
No way.
And the new energy that you get at that point.
When a
like,
recording device appears. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, so the summit, it isn't, again, it's probably just the exposure that really gets to you, but it's
Were
more
they
scrambling.
were they filming you guys? Like
They were, yeah, and
wow.
I'll tell you how I know
Yeah.
all this. But we got to the top, and I remember sitting down and putting my hands over my knees like this, and sort of on the top. And it's a lot bigger than it probably looks. Actually, it's not a point; it's quite big. There's actually a statue that's been hit by lightning, and it's got half of it intact of Mary. And yes, it's been the lightning's hit it. I remember sitting at the top thinking, I can't believe I've just got up there. That was a sense of achievement. It was like, blimey, I've done it. And then obviously this helicopter was still there filming, so there's a few waves and wherever. Then I realised I hadn't got my camera because we ditched the backpacks, and everybody ditches the backpacks.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that as well. So coming down on the abseil, literally, I just remember the piece of rock that we had to stand on was just, it was tiny. It was sort of this big, and we all sort of had a toe on it coming down. I remember stopping. You put a rat's tail and secure yourself to it, so you're secure. But there's a little bit of uneasiness there around it. The guides obviously are very confident of what they're doing, and then there's another bit to go down. So it's a climb up, but you come down. It's 2 abseils down to get back to where you started from. At least I think it's 2. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2. Either way, when we got back and we sort of went back to the hut, the helicopter was actually there. I went inside and I started saying, and I was like, there were Italian crew and they'd been doing this video. They were doing a video on mountain climbs. And I gave them the email address. I said, please just send me a picture. So I didn't have my camera with me anyway. But
no way.
I said, nothing is ever going to beat a photograph on top of Don de Jean with more block sunrise in the background. There's nothing ever going to beat that, ever. And they never sent it.
Oh, no.
Never got it.
Do you know what that company was called? Do you know what they
No, but
try and track them down?
I knew. I actually wrote, and I do speak a little bit of French, but I used the internet to work it through. Wrote to the mountain rescue helicopter sites in French, because I knew if I wrote in English, they wouldn't reply. And I asked on the day who was doing it and do you have any contact details? I never got a reply back from them either.
Wow. Oh, it'd
So,
be some photograph or some video.
yeah.
You
So
probably in
somewhere
some
in Italy,
documentary. Yeah.
in some Italian documentary, they'll be climbing on it. Yeah. But it has made itself into a movie. There's a movie called Summit Fever on Sky at the minute, and
Ah,
it's the first peak they climb, I
okay.
believe.
Is don't the
Yeah,
jaunt.
and that actually gives you a true feel for what it's actually like for the exposure.
Hmm.
It really does.
The drop. Just even looking, I can see one part where they hook on just when you're describing getting onto the face, and just the video I watched just in between these two meetings. I could see this and this drop that you're talking about, but it's obviously just the start of it, and then
Yeah,
it's yeah. Well, I will be able to kind of combine video with the conversation. So as you talk about something, we will kind of stop and try and figure out what there is there. Were you inspired by any of these names that I read out to you? You know, like Joe Tasker, Peter Boardman.
um,
Do you watch this stuff? Do you watch documentaries on climbing, or you just do climbing? So this is something you pick out as a challenge every year. It's something you work towards,
there's
and
always something I choose to
mm,
do. Yeah, the names, no, not necessarily. The thing is with climbing, it's if there's something on one day, I might sit and watch it. I think the only thing that I've watched recently was the Nepalese guy that managed to do the 8,000 meter peaks in a ridiculously short period of time. I mean, that's just superhuman. That I can't remember his name, but
it's
he's
like
super good.
it's that challenge that Messner started, wasn't it? Where he decided to do all the 8,000 meter peaks. It is kind of, it's like it's in the danger zone, isn't it? I mean, you're taking your life into your own hands trying to achieve
Yeah,
these. Is it four? There's 14 of them. Is that right? 14 8,000 meters.
yes, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds
A
right. Yeah.
few two women, I think, died on. Not sure if it was Annapurna this year, and that kind of brings me to the big question I wanted to ask you about. One of the things I follow is, you know, with Everest and George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. Do you have any opinion on did they make it to the top or not, or is that
I
something
think
you?
they made it to the top, but not the bottom.
Yeah,
Obviously,
okay, yeah,
I think they summited. I
yeah.
think they were just that they had that dogged determination about them. I'm pretty convinced they got there.
Will we ever know? I actually have the camera from that expedition. I have one of these that I encountered totally by accident around the same time when I started reading those books, maybe a couple of years before I started reading those books. I got one of these cameras, the Kodak Vest Pocket camera, and I have a video up on YouTube, and it has like 800 views just to see this. I turn it around a few times and press the
So
shutter, but it's interesting to see these cameras and would they be still there? Obviously they found what was the guy's name? George Mallory. They found his body.
it was Mallory, wasn't it? Like that's why he did stuff. And he said because it's there,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I totally get it.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
And
because it's something to do. Yes.
is it what way do you see a mountain? Like, do you have any kind of talisman things that you do before you climb a mountain? Do you have like things that you what's the word for it where you look for danger points? Do you have like a procedure or process that you go through when you're going to climb or when
Um.
you're climbing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not. I've got to say. I mean, I like to push myself whatever else, but I'm not one of these people that will free climb or do anything ridiculous, look El Capitan or something along those lines. Um, Everything I do, um, certainly since my son's been around, I'm a lot more safety conscious, and I'm not reckless at all. I mean, I think there is the expression I often used when it was to do with actually something very simple, which was the three peaks in the UK, was it got past the point of being dangerous. It was bordering on stupidity.
Mm,
Um, and that's when you're going to just walk off a cliff because it was foggy. That's what happened
yeah,
there.
yeah,
So I think that's the threshold is like dangerous, yes. Um, you've got to think of the other side to it is like somebody from mountain rescue is going to come out and find you
Mm.
or whatever. So
I kind of
go
have
prepared.
a motto
Yeah.
myself that, if I ever have to get rescued off a mountain, I'm going to hang up my boots. It's like,
Yeah. Well, not necessarily. I mean, to be honest, the guys that do that sort of work expect it. I mean, if you've fallen, injure your leg or something like that, but you've got all the right equipment and you've done everything you can, you can't really help that situation. But if you go up, ladies in high heels, or you don't take a warm jacket and you take no water or something, I mean, there's
mm,
actually a review of Ben Nevis, isn't there, where somebody complains, support allegedly a true review. Somebody said they got to the top of Ben Nevis and it's not like Snowdon because there was no restaurant up there. I mean,
yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's kind of there's a few different layers to it, but it's that process and procedure of what do you check, and that you don't engage in this activity in any reckless way. You don't,
um,
because you respect the people that would have to rescue, and a legitimate rescue is different than, something where it's hard to tell, isn't it, with those things? I know,
well,
looking at Scotland, 20,000 people any given day go out into the mountains, and the mountain rescue love their job. They 100% love their job. They don't ever judge somebody on doing something. Um, it's part of their life, or their lifestyle as well. I even see in Scotland at times they have somebody from mountain rescue up there camping, kind of so that they're up ahead of, if something does happen on a set of peaks, there's usually some guy up there. It's like they're on rotation almost, and they're up there camping just for the crack, but they're on some sort of rotation thing so that there is somebody up high that
I
can
didn't
get
know that,
across.
but
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's not impossible that that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Scots are tough people, aren't they?
Mm,
As a
yeah.
nation, they're tough.
Yeah. Um, Altitude was another thing, like, it was a question I had in terms of your experience with altitude. There's a lot of different thoughts on this. People don't have the experience, I think, or they don't realize what happens with altitude. Or the other point of this would be disorientation. How do you deal with disorientation, or how do you deal with low oxygen environments? Like, obviously, you have to be calculating enough to know that there's an effect on the way you think and the way you act and the way you operate at altitude. Um, I've been at altitude 3 times, and I kind of felt there was a bit of comedy at altitude as well. There's, because you're a bit lightheaded or whatever, there seems to be, comedy is more accessible, due to partial asphyxiation. I don't know if that's just me,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I don't know. I've not got that, but
at altitude there's less pressure holding your blood vessels together. The air takes 4 times, 4 times the breath to access the oxygen that's in it, because it lacks, the air isn't at the same pressure. Do you have any experiences with this environment? Do you have a method that you climb at when you're in that
no,
environment?
no. What altitude were you at, and where was it? Just curious.
So one of the mountains was Tubacol, which was 4,200
Oh yes,
meters.
in Morocco. Yeah.
Yeah. The very first encounter I had, sorry, the second last one was the Sierra Nevadas, which was 14,000 feet, or 14,400, and the Sierra Nevadas above a place called Bishop. And I just remember getting a headache. I'd literally gotten to America, landed in LA, and the very next morning set off to about 8,900 feet, and then set off for a walk to 14,000 feet that evening. And I just had a splitting headache. I remember I just said to my nephew, I said, I've got to go I've got to lie down. I've got to go to sleep. But I remember having one orange just before bed, and the pain in my head alleviated for about 40 minutes, and then it came back into my head. But the next day we climbed again, just much slower. So we were doing like 25 steps and stopping, 25 steps and stopping, and proceeded for the whole day like this until we got to the top. But my first encounter with altitude was the Grand Canyon. Now, people wouldn't think the Grand Canyon is any big thing, but I believe it's at 8,000 feet. The top of the Grand Canyon is at 8,000 feet. I was mountain biking at the time, was fit as a fiddle. I had a six pack, like no one could believe I actually could have had a six pack. But I was like 19 years of age, and I walked down into the Grand Canyon. At some stage, I turned around to walk back out, and I realized there was some sort of fatigue. It was like I was heavier. I couldn't understand what was going on. I've since understand it to be the altitude that I was at, and my body just wasn't acclimatized. We'd driven there. I decided to walk down 2 or 3 miles, and then turned around, and it took me like 6 times the amount of time to get out. It was only later on in life I realized it was to do with the altitude. You know, just at the Grand Canyon, just this
Yeah.
tiny slight difference in air pressure. Um, like obviously, you know, it's something I'm interested in because I believe there's a rate that you can climb at where these effects your body can acclimatize to. Just
Yeah.
wondering if you had any understanding of that, or what way do you?
Yeah. No, I've had it a few times actually, altitude sickness. So quite a bit of breadth of experience with it. Same as you in Morocco, in Nepal, in Mongolia, several places in South America. I remember the first time was on the Inca Trail, I believe. And then I went to a place called Vilcanota, if I remember it rightly, which was Nevado Ausangate was the name of the peak. And there was 5,000 meter peaks around there.
Mm,
And I remember feeling really not great, but okay. But there was one thing I did learn. It was to do with altitude, but not actually altitude sickness. Was you don't go to bed on a full stomach. I actually stuffed my face because I was so hungry, and the oxygen levels didn't let the food digest while I was
mm,
sleeping. I was up at 3 o'clock in the freezing cold. I think it was about -15 outside,
mm.
and I just couldn't not stop being ill, just
Wow.
violently ill. And there
Wow.
was a couple on the trip. There was only 4 of us anyway, but there happened to be a doctor and nurse, and they were saying, "We don't think you've digested the food properly."
Yeah, you're not
And
able
they
to
put us down.
oxidize it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I've always followed that advice ever since that point.
Fascinating. Yeah.
I remember
Um,
there was an Irish guy in my tent with me out at sharing. He was Irish, and he said to me, "You're not very well, are you?" And yeah, I thought he's nailed it. I think he realised I wasn't shamming, put it that way. But I mean, when I did Aconcagua, which is the Spanish pronunciation, because I learned about it in Peru, or I learned more about it. It's Aconcagua is the way British people,
mm,
Irish people, well, the
yeah.
Western world calls it.
Aconcagua.
Um, yeah,
Aconcagua.
um, that one. When I went there, I ended up sharing a tent with a Swedish judge at base camp, and he left. He was from Stockholm. I remember him saying he left Stockholm when it was -19, and he decided not to do the summit because he found it too cold, which I
Mm,
thought quite remarkable by Swedish standards.
yeah.
But I remember the altitude at base camp was about 4,400 meters. Um, and just getting out of the tent was an ordeal. I
Mm,
remember just walking, and my pulse was like 120 or something like that,
mm,
just standing up and
yeah.
moving.
Yeah.
Um, they,
Yeah. Just
yeah,
being normal.
just being there,
We
yeah,
we put a pulse oximeter on a guide in a similar situation, and his was just like resting heart rate at sea level. It was like 60, 69 or something like this. And we were at 110, 100. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, that's exactly. I mean, and then we stayed there for a good few days, and it was actually an Argentine company I'd used, but they were really professional. They're still going now. Um, they they have a doctor who signs you off to go. He does all the medical checks and whatever else, and I was good to go. And I remember, I can't remember the name of the first camp. The second camp, I think it's called Condor, if I remember rightly.
Mm,
And all I remember was I need to put my tent up and have a drink. Otherwise, I'm just going to really suffer here, or have to go down. So I got the tent up and I got myself warm, and I had a massive drink, all very, very quickly. And then I was fine because realized what was causing it. So address the problem, fix it. And then, and the thing is if I'd actually had a drink first and got warm and not put my tent up, there would have been a temptation to not bother putting the tent up at all. So that's why I made sure the tent was up first, because then I could just crash into it and
Yeah.
and
Shelter
be there.
first, isn't that what they say? Shelter, and then
Yeah. And then at the high camp of Berlin, which was the one at about 6,200 meters, that's when it was perishing. It was freezing. Yeah.
and you feel that. I remember when I was at the top of Tubacol, I looked up. I stupidly wore fingerless gloves because I had a GoPro. Everyone else had Snickers bars in this pocket here, to keep their Snickers bars warm. And I had batteries to do with a GoPro in this pocket. And I even remember changing them and thinking, oh my God, they're like blocks of ice. They were like ice cubes when I take them out of the camera. But I remember I was wearing fingerless gloves. I kind of went, it was like a mountain climb in Ireland. I had fingerless gloves on for the cameras, and I wasn't suffering too much. But I remember looking at my nails when the daylight came, and the whole center of my nails were white. I had like a tiny red ring around the outside of my nails. And I'm still to this day, I've never seen that again. I was
That's
fascinated by,
probably what I got
yeah.
as well then, because my nails went white.
Yeah, I was fascinated by just like this tiny red ring around them because of the cold. Um, Obviously we weren't up there that long, but it was still. I'll never forget walking up through the snow. That sound of crampons on ice. I remember thinking this will haunt you forever. This sound of the squeaking of sticks and ice and stuff like that. Let's go back to the camping and the Trident, and you didn't stop for warm drinks on the second day. You just plowed on. That was
I just remember being asked to trailblaze, but because I was carrying most of the weight, I ended up leading for quite a bit of time. And I think it was just to do with the fact that with the weight, it was clearing all the snow, so it was making it easier for everybody else behind to walk through. I don't know what the ratios were, if it was 1 hour, 2 hours, or whatever else, but I remember thinking, I've been doing this for ages now.
right.
So, but I think it came down to that. It was
Yeah.
making it easier for everybody else.
And it was keeping the rate up at that stage.
Yeah.
Like you said, you were the youngest on the
I was actually
expedition.
37. You said I was 29. I was confusing myself. I'm thinking,
Okay, I think you were 29 when you came up with the
I was
idea.
29 when I decided everything in my life that I was talking about doing, I was going to stop talking about it and start doing it. That was that point. And it wasn't until earlier I cottoned onto that. Yeah, because I'm thinking, 20. I'm sure I
So
wasn't.
you were 37 doing the Traverse of South
Yeah.
Georgia. Wow. Which is, I would have thought, yeah, you were much younger than that, but because you said, you were the youngest, but you were obviously the youngest of four people who were doing it at the same time.
Yeah, Bruno was probably pushing 50, but he was a fit guy anyway. The other two were probably just in the early 40s, maybe just turned 40.
Yeah. Now, what sort of training would you do week to week? Would you do any training? Do you go to the gym or anything like that? Is that something you do or have always done? Or
I used to play an awful lot of football, which kept me massively fit. Yeah, I played a lot of football. It was almost like, oh, we're short tonight. Do you want to come down and play five-a-side? Ended up playing, and then I'd get there and say, oh, we're short. Can you play for us as well?
So you'd like
So
play two or three
I played a lot of
matches?
football, yeah. But in the early 20s, I did do a lot of running. I was running 6 miles a night and putting half an hour circuit training. And I've always lived by, I could probably do with losing a bit now, but yeah, it's a different lifestyle. But I always swore by a bit of running, press ups, sit ups, and if you can, some chin ups.
Right.
And that's got me fit and strong enough to do most things.
It keeps you strong enough. Like
Yeah.
when you say a bit of, can, this is what I was talking about the technical information. Um, People would be interested in what a bit of is. Is it 100? Is it 25? Is it 50 of press ups, sit ups, stuff like this?
Um, it
Yeah.
used to be uh, always 50. 50 was always the benchmark. Do 50, but when it came to the circuit training, it was really really fast, but always had to be done properly. If I didn't do it properly, I wouldn't count it. And you've got to have that mental discipline.
Yeah.
So it was 10 press ups straight over to 10 sit ups, 10 press ups, 10 sit ups, and just do it.
And get to your 50. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
chin ups anytime you had access to a bar
Okay.
and do 10.
I'm gonna have to set one up in the middle of the forest. You'll see me doing a bit of what's Rocky Five, or was it Rocky Four? I'm not sure. Where he's doing all the
Four,
natural
I think
sit.
it was, but
Was
yeah,
it four? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. But actually, he did do that in the film. I wasn't. Yeah, now you've said it. Yeah, there was. It was Dolph, whatever he's called,
Yes,
Lundgren,
yeah.
was it?
The
He was
Russian
doing
guy.
all this sort of technical stuff and whatever else, and
Mm,
Rocky was just doing it the natural way,
yeah.
and that didn't influence me. It's just always been my way.
It's interesting. So, you've been very good, first of all, to let me talk to you. I'm sure we've just touched on the icing on the cake of your experiences and stuff like that, but you really have been very good to give me some of that detail about your experience. I, I'd, I'd love to put them against your video and other videos and stuff like that, and try and make a visual story as well, even though the story in itself is just brilliant. When you did get to the end, they didn't obviously. Was the whaling station still in Stromness? Was that there?
It was, yeah. So what happened was on the walk, we came up to another hill and dropped down into, if I remember right, it was Fortuna Bay, and then the boat was waiting for us, and that was actually really scary in a really unusual way. It was just because the bag weighed so much, and on the Zodiac, I just thought, if I fall backwards here, I'm never going to get this off quick enough.
Mm,
I'm going to just drop like an anchor.
yeah.
Um, but we went back on board the boat. We met up with everybody else, and then everybody else got off. And then they did the short walk up a hill. You come to the top, and Stromness is there. There's remnants of the station still left there. I mean, you can see there's buildings and structures when
Mm,
you get there. And it was the bit of a trudge down to the bottom with everybody else. So they'd actually made it so the rest of the ship could do it. That the ones that
mhm.
were up for it.
That last section.
Not everybody
Yeah.
did it.
Mm,
I remember there was an elderly lady in her 80s. She'd actually, because I'd been taking some photographs for her, she'd actually bought me a beanie from the museum because that was one of the compromises. I hadn't even asked her; she'd just done it for me. Um, she bought me this South Georgia beanie, and it was all because I'd been taking some photographs. But the rest of the group had gone to the museum at Grytviken because we were walking. We'd missed the opportunity,
okay. And
so
she.
we went at night
Mm,
time, which was almost like a military assault, to be honest, in a Zodiac trying to land across the fur seals. Um, it was definitely walking sticks at the very much handy trying to get them away. And then we went to Shackleton's grave
okay.
and we had a small glass of champagne, and in my case, very small because I don't drink.
Okay.
I've drank for about 30 years now. That was our little bit of celebration.
Lovely.
And I
Um.
actually put a photograph up somewhere. I can't remember. It must maybe it was Facebook many years ago. And somebody says, "Why have you put a picture up next to a grave?" I'm thinking, do you know whose grave that is?
Yeah. Proud moment, I'd say, to stand there
Yeah,
beside it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. I've often thought of that, in some of the accounts of it must
yeah.
be a fascinating feeling to have that. as something you've done. You say not many people know about it, but maybe
No,
some
not many people
people,
do know about it.
well, maybe some people might know after this, you know. It connects the dots for me in terms of the story, what it was like to have somebody real that's there, that was there, you know. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the time you've spent. Very nice to talk to you, Mark, this evening. I'm sure we'll update at some stage. So thanks very much for your time. Yeah,
Yeah,
great
thanks
talk.
very much.
All right. Cheers. Cheers,
Cheers.
Mark. Take care. Bye.